What is the unforgivable sin? Most people would respond and say, blasphemy. But very few people know what blasphemy is and why it was unforgivable. This idea that blasphemy is the unforgivable sin only comes from the gospel, from the words of Jesus. Jesus was responding to religious leaders who were accusing his miracles of being from Satan, of being demonic. And Jesus responded by saying, this is blasphemy against the Holy Spirit, and it is the one sin which cannot be forgiven. Many Christian apologists have come out and said that blasphemy is not necessarily one specific sin that you commit that cannot be forgiven. It's more of a state of mind. It is a certain degree of hardness in your heart. It is a refusal to acknowledge a certain truth and becoming so set in your ways that you won't ever acknowledge this truth. People like John Piper will say that if you're worried about committing blasphemy, then you likely haven't committed it because you're not so hardened in your heart that you're concerned with such things. And therefore, you still have hope. You can still be forgiven. So really what blasphemy is it's a state of mind. It's a place that you arrive where you'll never come back to a place where you will even want to seek God. You will want to seek forgiveness. You are too far gone. Your heart is too hardened, as they say. But why would somebody deny the obvious power of God? Why would somebody who sees the power of God working in their lives or in somebody else's lives and call it anything but God? You are seeing the evidence of God, and God is the epitome of love and grace and goodness and compassion. Why would you want to deny that those things are God? And why would you intentionally face the consequences of eternal torment in hell if you really believe that you witnessed the power of God and that that power can save you from that eternal torment? Because I would argue that those with hardened hearts aren't denying the power of God at all. They just haven't seen it yet. And using this term heart, in my opinion, is so misleading because it's often not emotions or feelings that lead someone to deny God. It is their intellect. The rejection of God isn't a rejection of God at all. It is a rejection of the God claim given to us by other people. And this rejection of the God claim is not usually rooted in any kind of emotion or feelings, but it's rooted in rational thought and knowledge. And I will admit that my initial departure from Christianity was emotional. I was working through a lot of things. I had experienced a lot of trauma brought on by my religious family who refused to accept my newfound doubts. And I was working through the realization that the God that I had dedicated my life to, that I was worshiping every day, was not who I thought he was. And that was very difficult. That was traumatizing in itself. It carried a lot of grief and confusion and fear. But this didn't make me stop believing in God. In fact, I still believed in God when I left Christianity. I still believed in Jesus. I had yet to commit blasphemy. I did recognize, or at least I thought that I did, the power of God. I just didn't know who he was or how to follow him. It wasn't until I freed my mind, until I opened up my worldview and I learned about science and history and philosophy that I came to no longer believe in God. It was a journey. It was a process. It was not an overnight thing, but it was a journey from faith into critical, rational thought. It was a journey where I sought knowledge, not faith. And this is what led me away from belief and into a more rational way of thinking and into this confidence that I now have that the biblical God, at least as Christians have fed him to me, does not exist. Now, 10 years later, I have reached this point of blasphemy, this point of no return. My eyes have been opened and I cannot shut them again. I cannot unsee what I have already seen. And although I rarely say never, I'm pretty confident that I will never again return to Christianity because of the knowledge that I have obtained on my journey away from it. And if you read the Bible, you won't get past the first few chapters without realizing that the biblical God's greatest enemy is knowledge. God put humans in a world that he doesn't want them to study and come to understand and learn about. He doesn't want open thought and a thirst for knowledge. The God of the Bible insists on blind obedience and unsighted faith. I mean, look at the story of Adam and Eve. God puts Adam and Eve in a garden and gives them a tree that they are not to eat from. And what is that tree? It's the tree of knowledge. And because they ate from it, because they sought knowledge, God cursed them and all of humanity Gaining knowledge is what led to the demise of all of humanity. It is what cursed every single person on earth according to Christian doctrine. And all of the chaos and destruction and suffering and calamity on earth is due to the seeking of knowledge. It's because of one human being who wanted to know more, and they went after that opportunity, and it cursed them. This theme of anti-knowledge continues throughout the entire Bible. Jesus said, "Blessed are those who believe without seeing," which means you must first believe something before you observe it. And this is the antithesis of science. Understanding of our world comes through observation, through seeing something, creating a hypothesis, and then following it out, observing, testing, working to prove yourself wrong so that you can see if what you believe is true. You don't first believe and then observe. No, you're supposed to observe and then believe. That is how we've come to conclusions about our reality. Observing our world is how we hypothesize and then prove. It is the reason we can type on a computer or drive a car or take medicine, because we've observed and studied the world around us. We have sought knowledge. Hebrews 11:6 says that without faith, it is impossible to know God, which means you have to first believe in God before you know anything about him in order to come to know him. Faith is belief without proof or evidence. And what other areas of our lives do we approach something so haphazardly? And what other areas of our lives do we approach something with the faith required to believe in God? In 1 Corinthians 20, Paul writes, "Where is the wise person? Where is the teacher of the law? Where is the philosopher of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world?" This is why so many Christians refuse science. They refuse the wisdom of the world, or the knowledge that has been given to us outside of religion, because the Bible tells them not to trust any knowledge outside of the Bible. And the Bible can't tell us how to predict the weather, or to create medicine, or to build cars. That's science. And in all other areas, Christians do believe in and trust science. They live in a world built by science. Science has become the enemy of most Christians today, even though they use science in their everyday life. They trust science in their everyday life. It is just this one area of their life that they refuse to trust it in. And it is because that one area has told them not to. At the end of the day, it is science and the seeking of knowledge that has led me to my unbelief and to my doubts. And in my experience, it is what led most people that are atheists to not believe in God. The church has been condemning those who seek knowledge for centuries. And before that, biblical authors were condemning the seeking of knowledge too. This has been going on since the earliest formation of the foundations of Christianity. Look at the earliest days of Christianity. You'll see that there was a group called the Gnostics. And these were Christians that did believe in Jesus. They did believe in God, but they had a very different idea of how to seek God, how to find him. And Gnostics were under this impression that how you found God was not through faith, not through blind belief, but it's through seeking knowledge. And it's so interesting that church fathers worked so hard to condemn this way of thinking as heresy, to the point where Gnosticism kind of faded out of existence and the orthodox way of being a Christian won out, because church fathers, because church leaders worked so hard to condemn those who were seeking knowledge. And we still see this in churches today. We still see pastors who are discouraging looking in other areas for God outside of the Bible or outside of the church. We see parents discouraging their kids from going to college because college will give them a worldly knowledge and it will lead them away from God. We see every single day the church working hard to suppress knowledge. I mean, just look at Sunday school classes. Look at the way pastors preach. They're not giving their congregations information about where the Bible came from, how it was formed, church history. All of that is skipped over. And they go right to theology. They bring everybody into their church with the assumption that God is already real and true. Just like in the Bible, it says you see without believing, you see without evidence. They think that you've already reached that point where you now believe without seeing. And so they're just going to continue under that assumption. But I would argue that it would be so much more beneficial for people if they had the knowledge of their religion before they had the theology. If they could understand where their beliefs came from and why, how they were formed, how they were changed over time, the history of heresy versus orthodoxy, which flip-flopped for centuries. Knowing these things, learning about these things is what has given me more confidence to not believe in the Christian God. because of how much corruption and change has gone through the Christian faith. But Christians aren't taught this. The church isn't giving this information, this knowledge to their congregation. They're telling their people to believe, have faith, and do whatever we tell you. And this is why I believe that knowledge is the unforgivable sin. That blasphemy stems from a knowledge of the world around you, and that you can only commit blasphemy, you can only get to a hardened state of mind where you refuse to believe because you have reached a certain point of knowledge and understanding about the world around you. One does not simply just discard this idea of God without first having the knowledge, the foundation to do that. And at the end of the day, I think that the church is so afraid of people gaining knowledge because they understand that knowledge is power. They have the knowledge, they just don't want to give it to you. And that is why they have the power. Those that want to control you don't want you to have power. This has been on my mind for a very long time. It is something I have worked hard to articulate for a while, and I hope that I have done a good job doing that for you. I hope that I have at least given you something to think about, shifted your perspective in some way. I want people to know that my goal here is not to discourage people from being Christian. My goal here is not to destroy Christianity. My goal here is to encourage people to use critical thinking, to not be afraid to seek knowledge, and not be afraid of the power that comes with that knowledge. If you like my content and want to support me, please subscribe, give a like, leave a comment. That helps me out a lot. You can also join my book club on Patreon, where we talk about all things deconstructing Bible history. We seek this very knowledge that the church has wanted us not to seek for so long. You can also follow me on TikTok. I talk about everything there, from deconstruction to church history to my thoughts on Jesus. Thank you so much for joining me today. And remember, knowledge is power.